apartments to stay in, but right now it's a place where we have to stay in. So it's a mixed blessing, but we are lucky that most of us, at least, have shelter, have food, have loved ones with it, or if we are alone, find a way to connect to the world. It is again the time of Corona. It's getting bigger and bigger. We thought over the summer was a bit more behind us. It is looming like a dark cloud, and it's coming closer on the horizon. Also, it's election week. It's a historic time. It's a historic moment in the history of the United States over centuries. This is a week that's coming up that will decide a lot of things. And artists, as we always say, are part of change. Artists are the ones who are on the right side of history, on the right side, the complex struggle for freedom, and the idea to encompass in work for the art, for theater, for performance, all possible views. You can look at it in different ways from here and there. Or character speaks from different sides, or expressions are open for reflection, and it's about what the people think who watch it and connect to it. So it's a form of democratic participation in society with the hope to change, to make a contribution. It has never been more important. It is terribly missing. This is what I miss so much. And but it's also a time now to reflect. What do we need? What is necessary? What was wrong before? What is the right thing to do? And it's so hard to see all these questions. So we're here not to explain, but we're here to explore. And this week still, we are in the second week of the Segal Center's Prelude Festival for over 15 years. We invite New York artists and companies, and only New York artists and companies. So it's very unique to the city. Over decades has supported the field to show their work in progress and to talk about it and to see what is the meaning behind it. What is it good for? Like very simple questions. And again, this is happening this week. So with us here are fantastic prelude artist Yeujia Low and Dena, Igusti, Leandra Lassour, and Stefania, Bulbarella. They're all with us here with David Brun, the curator, together with Miranda Harmon. He is curating the festival. David is a dramaturg, a critic, and a doctoral candidate at Yale University, the School of Drama, where he studies contemporary theater and performance. But of course, we think he really studies theater and performance at the Prelude Festival and with us. So David, tell us a little bit about what's behind the idea of this year's festival, and why did you choose our guests?
Sure. Thank you, Frank. The theme of this year's festival is Sites of Revolution. It's kind of the animating idea. And Miranda Heyman, my co-curator, and I were interested in the ways that revolution was playing out. Obviously, there was the kind of standard repertoire of revolution happening with the uprisings this summer, along with various other protests. You can also think of mutual aid as an integral part of that. But we were also interested in ways that it was playing out between loved ones and in different time signatures. So very brief moments, but also very long throws of history within family relationships, but also histories of nations. And in the case of Yeujia Low and her work, this relationship between animals and humans, which you're extremely interested in. So that kind of thematically was really pulsing, that was exciting our imaginations. I would say, what's great about the festival, what's always been great about the festival is that it's been an opportunity to bring together theater, performance, dance, in interesting combinations. Past festivals have featured food as performance and virtual reality, in addition to things that you might recognize under the rubric of theater or dance theater or performance. All of the artists we have gathered here today are really fascinating and exciting to me, not only because they've found a way to use the digital platforms as a way to showcase their work, but also because they're integrating and combining so many different forms. So with Yeujia's work, there's musical theater and animation, and this really interesting battle between humans and animals. With Dena's work, there's poetry. She's a very accomplished poet, and I've always been interested in the role of poetics and prosody and how that has informed theater from the very beginning. So in some ways it's very new, but also the most ancient part of the art form. Leandra works across various media, using the gallery space in incredibly interesting ways with video, but also performances in which Leandra's present in the performance. So that's all exciting to me. And Stefania works as both a director and a video designer. And so I think designers really have a role to play in becoming more and more lead artists as theaters are experimenting with, what type of work we might be able to showcase, fund, what kind of collaborations we might be able to build. So even though, as we've said on these talks before, the theater industry is really at a very difficult time, healthcare being maybe, one of the most acute crises facing people who are working in the so-called field. I've been very excited just by the 4 artists on this talk, but also everyone in the festival and the way they're rethinking the form. So maybe, Frank, we could do introductions. People could tell a little about who they are in their project, and maybe I'll recommend that we go in the order of when their work has shown or will show. So we'll start with Dena, and then Stefania. Their work has already been presented and is available, and then Yeujia and Leandra will follow them.
Hi, my name is Dena Igusti. As David and Frank have mentioned before, I am a poet and the author of Cut Women, which is published with Game Over Books. And the work that I did for Prelude is a choreo poem of excerpts of that piece. And the whole piece kind of centers around the concept of death and grieving, and how do you navigate anticipated loss, especially when it comes to a queer Muslim Indonesian body that is a survivor of female genital mutilation.
And you also performed the work, right? Yeah.
Yes, I did.
Stefania.
Hi, everyone. I'm Stefania Bulbarella. I'm in New York. Currently, I'm from Buenos Aires, Argentina. And in Prelude, I worked on Una Niña, Una Familia, Un Pueblo. That is, it's the beginning of an adaptation of my grandma's memories when she left Italy during the Second World War and arrived to Argentina and created her whole life there. So it's the beginning of an exploration of where do I meet my grandma as an immigrant. So kind of navigating the past and the present. And it was the first time that we could start trying it out with actors. So it was actually really helpful to understand where the story wants to go and how we want to keep on building the story and telling the story. So yeah, that was my piece at Prelude.
Hi, my name's Yeujia. I'm an actor, musician, and a theater maker, and I'm also a music director. An accompanist. What I'm showing for Prelude this time is it's a show called Animal Empire. It's a work in progress. It's about the fall of human supremacy, and about animals overtaking the human race in various forms. So our pets attack us, the zoo animals riot, the wild animals invade the cities, the insects come up from the ground, all kinds of stuff that are totally plausible to happen, but just haven't happened yet. Yeah, and it's going to be eventually a digital short film using animojis and various other like foam technologies. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Leandra Lassour, based out of Jersey City, New Jersey. My piece, Passing Time with Grace, specifically about kind of how we speak to ourselves, how we kind of navigate this question of grace and what it means to accept grace, what it means to show yourself grace, show others grace. So it's a piece that incorporates language. It's a piece that incorporates movement in order to kind of process these kind of negative projections and feelings that deal with like how we process trauma. And then also thinking about like the resolve in coming to terms with understanding, oneself and understanding and this image of what grace truly looks and feels like when you reach that point.
Well, it's a real variety of work, really covering, I think, contemporary theater and performance. How does it feel for all of you to produce something where it's not clear where it will be shown, when, in what form? Definitely, most probably not designed for a screen, but now you do it here in a time of Corona. Maybe you can share a bit how you experiencing this moment.
Unless Stefan, you want to go. For me, it's been an interesting process. I think like, especially for me as a poet, initially, I've always kind of worked within a digital space and also working in performance poetry. A lot of how we navigate the medium, or the poets navigate the medium, is more so in the digital space because of digital publishing, because of video. So at first, the idea of it not being in a tangible physical space was kind of daunting, but I felt like it gave a lot more room to kind of play with not necessarily emulating physical space as much as possible, but kind of delving into what is actually available. So focusing more on like the importance of the internet in this work, and focusing more on like the importance of like not being in a tangible physical space where people are actually watching you, but interrogating the ways in which people watch you outside of a stage or some other reading or something along those lines, but for instance, like through a camera and through all these things.
I can also speak to this. As a video designer or projection designer, I'm generally used to thinking about video in relation to bodies on space now, but now we just see it through a screen. And what I've been encountering lately is that as a video designer, I come into a rehearsal process much earlier, like that we're used to in what we used to do before. So it's not that we only have a production meeting and we meet once a week. I'm in rehearsal. And even sometimes, if depending on the project, we're working with OBS at the moment. And that is what...
Can you explain? Yeah.
OBS, oh yes, what a world. OBS is a software that we're currently using, some of us. There's a few other options, but well, not many actually, but OBS is one of them. It's a software that allows us to live VJ as we are capturing a Zoom meeting. So what we'll do is bring in the Zoom meeting, crop the Zoom meeting and bring it into OBS. And then what OBS is streaming the product, and OBS will let us like change the background. If actors have a green screen, we can change it so they can be in a space we want to choose. We can put them together on the same space. We can add text, we can add effects, we can add a few things. I've been like coming from programming QLab and Isadora. I'm like, how do I do pre-weights on OBS? This can't allow this. It's another world. It's a new world, and we're getting used to it. Tech is weird. Tech, it's like, how I'm communicating, I'm not seeing anyone. It's a new world. I miss being in tech with all the people in the room. Can't wait to be there. But yeah, what the great thing about it is as a designer, I come in very early in the process, and the video informs the story and the atmosphere, as well as the actors inform the video, which is not, we're getting into tech and seeing it for the first time. And in 1 week, 1 week and a half, trying to build this world, which is actually so rewarding. And I think the process changes completely.
Yeah.
I think for me, in terms of where how is it like not knowing where this project is going? I think it was like earlier in maybe May or even early June, where I just kind of ditched my old ideas that I had been working on and was like, okay, this is obviously gonna, be happening for a while. And so I made a list of like all my ideas, and then I looked at them and was like, okay, which of these ideas no one has to be touching. It doesn't require lots of people around. It could maybe use some kind of creative audience seating or audience participation. And then from there, I was like, okay, well, this seems to be the project to work on now, and it's like most feasible. And then I also made like a whole list of like things that I didn't just want to be like, okay, let's work with what we have, but to like capitalize on the atmosphere now. Like, okay, so we're all stuck in this digital space. Like, instead of just making do with it, what could we possibly do that takes that further, like makes use of it? And I think just during that period of time, maybe like in May or April, I was looking at my phone a lot and just realizing that like there's so much technology on our phone these days with like, I think that was also when the whole TikTok thing was, I don't even know what it, I don't know what month was everything. Where, like TikTok, which I had never explored before, but like there's so many filters on these apps like TikTok, Instagram, our MacBook, like the photo booth, even Zoom. There's like so many filters, options, things that you can do. And like, I'm not a tech person at all. So even like me learning how to use a filter is like, oh, a filter, wow. But yeah, it was like, I was surprised to kind of realize that no one had really done a movie, or I hadn't heard about a movie where you literally like use the animojis on your phone. Like it's almost like, the movie Emoji or something. There's some big Hollywood movie emoji. Like that could have been done using your iPhone, technically, on like a green screen. So that was that's been my headspace for the past few months, but it's definitely been like the end result is definitely meant for the digital world and not meant to be staged in any way. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna add, as like thinking about my work in performance, I've always thought about how the body responds to this idea of like the spectacle. And so for me, I've always tried to create spaces where I'm creating this intimacy, not with the audience necessarily, but with myself. And so I think in this time that we're in now, in this like digital landscape where everything now is digital, like as creators, we now have more agency and power over how our work is viewed and in what ways the audience takes in what we're trying to say and how we're trying to say that. And so for me, it almost became natural to have this kind of way or this mode of creating, because I was able to kind of, have agency and control over how my body is viewed and how my body is interacted within this kind of digital space.
Yeah. And do you feel it's working? What do you think about what you produce as a step in the process? What did you learn?
I mean, personally, there's a lot of things that I've learned. I did learn that this could be definitely workshopped via Zoom till we get into a space. But I feel that I realized this piece is not meant to live in the digital world. I'm happy to develop it through this world and start developing it. But in my case, at least, yeah, I'd rather wait for us to be able to convene in a rehearsal room once again.
Dena, have you done your piece, Catwoman, as a performance on a stage?
I had an
setting you did was that living room with the bed and all that. Is that?
No, that was actually my first time doing it kind of more in like a more intimate setting. So prior to Catwoman, I usually just read my poems or perform them on stage. It's just myself and a microphone, and there's just a huge audience. And most of the time I can't see them. So I'm not really concerned about myself. So Leandra, what you were saying before about feeling a sense of agency, I kind of felt that more. I usually feel that more on stage because oftentimes I'm not concerned about the audience. But with this piece, I felt the slight opposite, where like while I did have agency, I felt like I was more hyper aware of how I was being seen. I think like while I was able to kind of control the ways in which I was being seen in terms of like I can add a filter when I need to, I can blur things out if I want to. I think doing it in an intimate setting as a living room and a bedroom made it feel more personal. It made me tie back to where and why I wrote it, which was oftentimes in my bedroom, in a living room behind a computer screen, analyzing everything that has happened and kind of writing in response to that. So I kind of felt like the why and how I'm producing or how I'm presenting it kind of merged in a way. And I think emotionally I had to step out of myself in a particular way where like, while I know that I am performing, I can't re-trigger myself in a way just because the settings feel intimate to when I first wrote the pieces.
Yeujia, were you going to speak earlier?
Yeah, in response to like Stefania's work, I saw her piece on YouTube on the website, and like there were certain moments. I know you said like this definitely belongs in the not digital space, but there were certain moments. I think especially the giving birth scenes. It's just funny to like be staring at your screen, and then like you feel like you're on a call, on a Zoom call with someone who's giving birth, and then the person's like screaming. There's just something like funny about that, and I feel like we've seen people giving birth on stage, and yeah, there was definitely something interesting about about that. Yeah, in terms of like for me, I think about whether what I've noticed is that in terms of working digitally and stuff like that, I think I used to be like as theater people we're like, oh, live performance is like always the way to go. But I think over the course of the past few months, I've kind of like seen the value of having a digital medium as well, because not only because it makes you creative in different ways and you can do different things, but just the fact that it's always there. You have like at least one kind of art or piece or product that's always there, and can be watched or accessible at any time, which I realize is very valuable in such a when weird things happen like this pandemic. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it is many art historians, also literary historians said when a new technology started, let's say Goethe and Schiller, the writers wrote with their feathers, their quills on the inside, horse carriages, and then a typewriter came, was changed the writing in a way that it was the entrance of women into the workforce, and all this sudden stuff got typed up, and the first readers, were the typists, and the man couldn't write the way anymore. They were confused about it because they were making fun of him. Kafka went back from typewriting actually, to dictating, and then had someone write it by hand. It was important to him. And then the computer came up, of stuff was seen on film. And so when Rancière, a French philosopher, said, if a traditional art encounters a new technology, something radically changes. These are the real changes, and not, artists in that sense, the romantic genius idea who does it. Now we do have Zoom. We have this interruption. As a question to you, do you feel this is that's just the time you will get over, we will go back to where we were? Do you feel actually this is really radically changing the way we think? Or it will be both? So just to know how you at this moment experience that. Is that influencing you in a fundamental way, or is it just a way to deal with a moment and then you will adapt going back to what we all were trained to do before?
That's a great question. And I have a lot of mixed feelings in terms of while, like, yes, we all miss theater and we all miss like being in physical space. I think this time, and especially seeing theater in digital space, kind of blew the theater industry wide open, especially in terms of accessibility and in terms of agency and in terms of who gets to make art, but who gets to see art. Like, I know in the beginning of this time, there were a lot of criticisms of theaters who suddenly had live streams and had free programs to things and performances that were usually like $50 plus. And unless you were a student, you weren't able to access that. I've been seeing kind of just other ways in which like people have like played with subscription systems in order to give like cheaper options, but also accessibility in terms of, well, if you are hearing impaired, how are you accommodating to that? If you're visually impaired, how are you designing things and how are you creating things in which like you are also accommodating to those people as well? So I think whether or not we stay in this moment heavily depends on this administration and heavily depends on how we are as a whole community. But I don't, and while again, there are aspects of theater that I definitely miss, and being on stage is great, I don't want this to be this temporary moment where we're like, okay, we only did it because of this pandemic and then we're gone. No, we have to take away a lot of these things. We have to take away like the role of classicism and the roles of accessibility and the roles of elitism that the theater industry unfortunately has had for years, and kind of remove those systems as much as we can.
Yeah, something that happened while I was working on this project, it was that I worked with 5 actresses, 4 in Argentina and 1 in Brazil, while I'm in New York. So that could have never happened before, where I'm in New York and they are in another country, thousands of kilometers away. So that was kind of I was like surprised of that is even possible when I could have never imagined it before. I do, you know, I want to go back to the theater. Don't, like, as Dana was saying, I'm like, yeah, true. I don't want this to go by, this time to go by. And it's like, oh, we're here till we get there. I do think that great things are coming out from this moment we're going through. And there's a lot of things that I'm learning or exploring that I would have never explored before. And I think they will translate in a way to what's going to come in the future.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big question. I think it was the American dancer Louis Fuller. I think she was in 1880 or whatever. She danced in Paris, a classical dance, but she heard of light, or electric light, and she said, how about putting a filter, as Yeujia just now said, how about I put blue in front of it? So she got some guy to do some cobalt, thing on a piece of glass. And she held, I think, 40 patterns on it, and people went crazy. She did her dance in white robes. Everybody's in, but all of a sudden she had 20 colors, and something changed, and she also, it helped to guide, people into something that's coming, that will be coming in. And the question is, what will happen? What will be the adaptations of it? The first cars looked like horse carriages, but it was not about it, and so the real question is, what will this moment do? David, you as a curator, do you detect a change? Do you feel something truly different is happening at the moment?
I'm optimistic about, well, as I've said on other talks, but I'll repeat here, I'm very optimistic about the artistry and the vision and resourcefulness and willingness to collaborate, and also willingness to adapt by artists. I mean, that festival, if it's anything, I'll speak for myself, but I feel like Miranda would support this well. It's a love letter to that kind of generosity, creativity, and labor that I see everywhere in artists. To me, it's about the industries, whether it's the theater industry or the art world, so-called, that are threatening the art in some ways, and or the ability for art to be a place where people can gather freely. And of course, the burden of that tension, or the burden of those failures, falls disproportionately on Black people, Indigenous people, people of color, gender nonconforming people. We know these systemic injustices, and they're exacerbated. I'm very hopeful that, I've been in New York, in and around New York, for about 10 years. As I said, we had a panel about the gala as an idea, as a site that has a tendency to amplify those injustices and inequities. One of the panelists said it had the feeling of a caste system, which I think is apt. I mean, the fact that 3 theater professionals, very established in their field, 2 of them, embedded in and working at very important institutions, so who are up in the public, we're on a public panel and we're talking about decolonizing wealth. That was, to me, unimaginable 10 years ago, and I mean, I remember when Oscar Eustis went on OK Radio, which was a podcast the collective, the Nature Theater of Oklahoma, hosted, and said publicly, when they were doing the renovations for the public theater lobby, I need a space where rich people can go. And I mean, that would just be grounds for termination maybe at this point. Certainly a kind of reckoning. So I've been really inspired by how artists have self-organized in the context of the theater with We See You White American Theater, that this wasn't sanctioned by a collective or body. It was a grassroots movement that was very inspiring, as well as the theater partnerships with mutual aid organizations, that some of which we featured, earlier in the festival. So again, I'm optimistic about art. I'm less optimistic about the lack of healthcare or the difficulty of getting healthcare. Again, I sound like a broken record, but this is incredibly important to me, not only personally, but for the entire field. I have a question for the people on the call, kind of building off of this, that Frank asked yesterday that I thought was really interesting responses, but all of us kind of in some ways intersect with New York City. And I'm curious what people's thoughts are about the future of the city. Obviously, it seems like every day in Fox News, they're talking about how terrible it is. So there's a certain need to push back against that, but there's also real cause for concern, given, that cost of living doesn't seem to be dropping down drastically. I'll just say that one of my hopes would be that they would turn Class B and Class C office space, which is not first floor office space. The city should buy it. They should do some small renovations to soundproof it and give it to artists, because people are not going back to those offices. They're just going to sit there. So I think, and this was a proposal by a group several years ago, the Center for an Urban Future. So I'm cosplaying them at the moment. But that'd be my great hope, is that we could solve this space problem, because it was crippling before. It doesn't seem to be changing. Honestly, I know we can't gather now, but that'd be my greatest hope, that studio space would just be wide open to anyone who wanted to use it. But I'd love to hear from the panel, of course. What are your thoughts on the future of New York City as a arts ecosystem and as a home? And maybe, Leandra, I'd actually be curious to hear from you, because you have, you've worked in maybe the gallery context, and it seems to me like galleries are coming back in a certain way. Obviously, the major museums are open with restrictions and things, but I've seen news of smaller galleries. I'm not sure if Microscope's open, but I'm curious, maybe from someone who works outside the traditional theater ecosystem, what your thoughts are.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question, David. In terms of just the arts in general, galleries, like, mid-range galleries, larger galleries, smaller galleries, I think all of them are struggling to try to figure out ways to engage and ways to get people to come see work in person. So they've been heavily reliant right now on this kind of digital landscape. But I think in regards to the city and where the city's at and my thoughts on that, I'm not sure. For me, sometimes, some days I feel like it's very grim in terms of the outlook. And on other days, it seems like the way that we can go is more positive. And I think that's because it depends on the people of the city and how we kind of like rethink space and rethink, what we can do with the space that we have, what we can do within space in the parameters of what's happening right now in the world. And so I think that's why right now artists are so important to that thought process, and to like creatively rethinking, like, what is space? Like, how do we, interpret space? Like, how do we like recreate space? But also, how do we build and make space out of no space? And so that's why for me, this kind of move into this digital space or digital landscape has been important, and has been something that I feel that I felt has been really, really key in like organizing, but also a key in just like providing a voice for people who have sometimes been voiceless because they haven't had the actual space to do or say what they need to. So that's where the positive comes in for me, in thinking about that and thinking about how artists are kind of taking the charge in the ways that we're thinking about future and the ways we're thinking about space.
And also thinking about space, now that I hadn't thought about it, this was possible to make my piece because we had a space. The actors had their own space to rehearse in. Maybe if they didn't have their own space and we were rehearsing each one in their house, I wouldn't have been able to start developing this piece at all, because after all, I need to eat and pay rent. So I'm always working on projects that will hire me as a video designer. And sometimes like directing was left to the side because maybe the projects I would love to sort of like self-produce or direct, I don't have time because I need to be working on other stuff to pay rent and to eat. So this actually has worked because there was a space. And yes, this is crazy now. I hadn't thought about that before.
I guess in response to David and like you sound rather optimistic about space going forward, and I'm just like not that optimistic. I mean, for me, I used to use Spaceworks quite a lot. So they have, I don't know if people have used Spaceworks. So they have studio space in Long Island City, in Brooklyn, a few spaces in Brooklyn, and I think they kind of regulate some space at Abrams Art Center as well. And they were, I think one of the cheapest ones was like $10 an hour. They had music rooms for $10 an hour. It was like, there was a drum set, there was, guitars, bass, you could, it was great. And I think they closed in July or June. So I was really sad to hear that. And I mean, I think that for me kind of indicates where, pretty much I expect that getting space as an artist is always going to be difficult. Yeah. So I'm not too optimistic about that. Yeah.
I feel like with the question of space, and I'm coming from the place of not only being an artist that is in New York, but someone who was born and raised in New York and has been displaced and has been affected by gentrification due to art washing and expansion of arts industries and arts institutions. So when we interrogate space and when we talk about space, I think while yes, there needs to be room for artists in order to create art, we have to also be mindful of space for who and being mindful of who is the space for. Is it space for out-of-state artists that are going to raise prices and displace Black and brown people of color who've lived here for years? Or is it going to be a space where it is actually going to be shared with other aspects of the community? Because I think and I'm sorry if I'm getting slightly emotional about it, but I think it is important for there to be art spaces. But I think as artists who always want to be on the right side of history, we have to talk about the ways in which we've been wrong. And also talk about how when we've talked about space, what does it mean and who and which artists and for who, right? Yes, I'm a theater artist, but also when I was 12, I was evicted because NYU created an expansion of their theater program, So I think I do have some hope for New York in terms of repurposing and reusing space. But I think as artists, we have to really interrogate the implications of creating spaces and repurposing spaces. And what does it mean for there to have been no space? And what does it mean for there to be an empty space, especially in regards to housing?
Yeah. Yeah, I think perhaps this is also something of the new times we do live in, that we ask such questions. I remember Cami from the laundromat projects that we produce so many things. We never ask each other, how are you doing? What's going on? And as you said, we create spaces, but perhaps we didn't fully ask, well, what about the kid that has to be displaced? We kind of thinking about it, but we didn't really ask and we didn't really listen. And I think when people also about diversification of institutions, we also, yes, it's important, but did we really listen to what people were saying? And what are we going to change? And the hope is that this is a different a moment. So my question to all of you is, do you see your art as a practice, as an aesthetic practice, as a practice that, explores century-old pursuit of mankind, of colors, form, connections, giving meaning? Do you also see it strongly also as a political work? Is it part of what for social change? Is it in between, or do you separate these and say, well, if I'm delivering mask, I'm delivering mask. If I do a play, I'll do a play. So what are your thoughts on your work? How do you put this puzzle together? Everybody has to truly think about? How is it for you individually?
I actually have a response to that, because going off of what Dena said, I appreciate those words so much, because I think, you know, as artists, as creators, like, we can't just think about the aesthetic, think about the creation of work. We have to go a step further and think about how that work then changes the way that people outside of the arts are looking at the things or the world, and the way that things are happening in the world around us. And that goes into thinking about community and the way in which your work engages community, but also the way in which your work prioritizes community. And so, you know, within my work, I'm speaking to my community, I'm speaking to Black queer women, but I'm also thinking about the ways in which my work can support Black queer women and those communities, and make sure that I'm making space, not just for myself as an artist to create, but making space for other voices to be heard that are just regular people who are not artists, you know, and who are going through daily struggles, and having to deal with those struggles alone most of the time. And so I think as artists, like, especially right now in the year 2020, a lot of people are kind of changing the dynamics of their practice and the way that they're thinking about the creation of work, because it's beyond just the creation of work right now. It's mostly about working to change, like, systems, and make these demands. And I think as artists and creators, we have that power to really put a spotlight on a lot of the issues that are happening, and actually make those demands, and kind of create this catalyst for change.
Like I also forgot to mention that in terms of like space in the city, I am also in, you know, despite like this space work that I mentioned being shut down, I'm also in a studio share, a music studio share, in a really, really old building right on 8th Avenue. It's like really close to Port Authority. I think it's been there since like the 1940s, 1950s. Like the elevator barely works. But it's an amazing building. It's, I think, 8 floors of 6 or 7 studios in each floor. And they're all music studios. It's very drummer heavy because of all the drummers who can practice in the city. But it's an amazing building. I have no idea who owns this, but I'm pretty sure that the rent for each room is stabilized. But yeah, I have no idea who owns this building. I hope it continues to exist. Yeah, so that's definitely in contradiction to like a lot of the newer spaces that I've seen and been in. In response to whether I see like art, or more especially my art, as like more of an aesthetic purely thing or a political thing, I've thought about this question quite a bit, and especially in the past few months as well. And I think I just came to the conclusion that well, firstly, I just think my forte, or like my strength, is not in being overtly political. Like, even if I tried to be, I just would not know how to be. It's just not in me. I do not know how to make overtly political art. And then the second thing was that I kind of realized that I think all art is political. Like, whatever I say, like if I do a show, like a story about a boy who wants to go get a fish, he goes to the river, he can't get a fish. Like that is political. You could read that in a political sense. So I feel like even without me trying to make something political, it's going to be political anyway. And I think the third thing that I feel most strongly about is that for me, I feel like a lot of my friends or the theater world is kind of very, I would almost say like we kind of all believe the same things already. Very much like speaking back to like the whole 2016, like the whole echo chamber idea, where like we all thought, you know, everyone thinks the same way, but it was just that we were all in the same bubble. And so for me, I think, like, let's say I want to try to convince someone that the sky is blue. I would not, like, you know, make a piece called The Sky is Blue, because then people who think the sky is yellow would be like, you're crazy, and like be like, bye. I might make a piece about colors of the rainbow, and then, you know, I could you know, potentially invite this person to be like, hey, here's a piece about colors of the rainbow. It has nothing to do with the color of the sky. And in that sense, I feel like I could reach people who do not necessarily agree or are even open to anything that I personally believe in. Yeah.
Dena.
I don't think my art is an entirely aesthetic thing. And I think it's mainly because of the ways in which I navigate art, especially as someone who is Southeast Asian, as someone who is Muslim, and talks about those things. It's hard for it to not be political. Of course, there is an aesthetic to it, there's a beauty to it. But I think also at the same time, especially as a poet, choosing what I get to portray, choosing what I aestheticize, choosing what I romanticize, similar to what Yeujia said before, like that is also political, especially as someone like, for me, I'm diasporic, I'm first generation. Like if I talk about my mother or if I talk about my aunt, like I have to also be aware that while I aestheticize them in a particular way, that also to some degree, I don't want to say removes their agency, but I'm the main vessel and I have to acknowledge the privileges that I have in doing that as an artist, but also kind of as someone who is born and raised in America and like understanding that like, because I'm under this colonial empire, like that is always going to be kind of prioritized. So in short, I think it's a combination of both, but I think I have to be very mindful in the factors when it is aesthetic.
Yeah, it's also a question I ask myself all the time, and I think I don't have a clear answer to it yet. I think it's a combination as well. It's kind of an opportunity to have a conversation where the other person doesn't respond though, so it's kind of like weird. But there is a desire for change and a desire to tell a story that there's something deeper within it. Yeah, those are my thoughts.
Yeah, it's a really significant question. One of the things we had Florian Malzacker, who's a German curator, and he wrote a book currently on the political, and he said what he detects as the most significant change is about the how you do your work. He said it used to be just the content. You know, let's say you did something about child soldiers in Africa, about destruction of an environment through an oil company, and it was good enough. But still, it was written by one playwright, directed by a director who's, a dictatorial style, who in the world we live in now would look very at it. And so it's a hierarchical presentation within a machine of a theater that actually represents the system, especially in America. It's privately owned. It's to make as much money as possible, in Broadway at least. What's successful is good. What's not successful is not good. As if in a bookstore you would only have books who are top 10 books, or the top 20, and you wouldn't have the other ones available. And so he says that, the way you create work in ensemble, he said there's a tendency that there's ensembles who work together, even 2 directors, 3 directors now, curatorial things are 2 or 3 people. That there's a distribution of the text where actors can, like when they polish at the Volksbühne, where you can choose what part they want, or they write something on it. And he says, if I come in as the director and I tell them what to do, I'm paid more. I create a lead character, I lead the second and the third. I am reproducing structures. We actually are opposed to it, and my entire play is against it, but I do the same on stage. So do you feel, or is that part of your thinking, the way you produce your work, the way you implement it, all the stuff we don't? So are you rethinking that? Is that something you can say, yes, that's true? Or do you think it's not part of your not part of your consideration, and say we just what I put out is significant. And
I think about it a lot, and I feel like every day I'm rethinking it. I think in that similar way, in terms of like, what does it mean to be an artist that is against certain structures, but then also implementing other structures is tricky. And I think while like I'm mostly in poetry, like you see it in the systems too, like in the poetry realm, for instance, like there's a lot of conversations about tokenism and like the roles in which like elitism and classism play into the practice, right? So for me as a writer, but also kind of delving a little bit into theater, sometimes I wonder like, what does it mean to kind of engage in art itself? And specifically, what does it mean to engage in art in America? And especially like as a person of color, in terms of what does it mean to always be hurt by different traumas and systemic things, but also not reenacting them, but still talking about them certain ways. And like, what does it mean, for instance, too, for in a lot of art institutions and a lot of artistic structures, for us to be against the system and the social systems that are in place, but then also oftentimes for youth writers, like we kind of force youth BIPOC to kind of remind their trauma in hopes that like they will get a footing or set foot into these industries and in these practices. And then another thing of what does it mean whenever I do engage in trauma at all? What systems are in place in order for me to write these poems? What systems are in place and what are the things that have happened before me in terms of generationally? What wars have occurred? What forms of colonialism have occurred? What roles of classism and elitism have happened in order for me to like not only just be a writer and have the privilege of being a writer, but also at the same time, like being able to write about these things, but being seen not as a spokesperson, but as someone where it's like, okay, if she says it, then it must be true. So that's something I've kind of been interrogating in terms of like the privileges of like what it means to be an artist and rethinking how much authority an artist has in a particular sense.
Yeah, I also think 100% in collaboration. I'm a fan of collaboration, and the ideal world for this project in terms of keep on developing it would be like, take me to a house upstate with a dramaturg, a playwright, 5 actresses, a video designer, a sound designer, and we'll create from the beginning of it all together. And as a director, I can facilitate ideas and like organize in a way that we can try different things, but then the best one will remain. And it won't be my idea. It won't be maybe the actor's idea. Maybe it's the sound designer's idea, but we've all created this world together. But of course, that is like, I can dream about it. Now, how do I actually get the budget to do this, you know? So those are things that's beautiful to dream about it, but is it possible? Is this possible? But yeah, collaboration, 100%.
I definitely work in the same way. Like I love collaborating. I'm definitely still, and I've been on both sides, like as a music director or in a accompanist where I'm like kind of serving someone else's vision and composing or arranging according to what someone else wants. And then also been on the other side where I'm like, okay, this is the idea. But I've also kind of struggled, or I'm still learning how to be like, this is the idea. Let's bring in a group of people to kind of fill in, make this idea or this universe larger, or to kind of fill in that little universe or tie in something that I did not think could be tied in. And then me having to go, okay, now stop. This is where we are going, like for this project, or like this project at this time, this is what we're doing. Is something that I'm definitely learning. And I guess going back to like, if I'm going to work in a different way whenever this thing is over. So 2 of my actors are also not in New York. But I mean, it's great that we could work on this, but I definitely think that, I mean, as actors and like people trained to like, you know, read body language and who are very sensitive to body language, like it's just completely different when you're working with someone and all you see is like this and you don't even know how tall the person is or like, you know, where their feet are, like, are their feet pointing towards you? Or are they like pointing towards the door? Like, I want to leave, I hate you. It's like, you can't, you know, it's so much better to just be in the room. And I feel like we're all great at already doing that. So like having to train yourself to be like, let's try and read this person's mood from like what's in the background is like, just does not work for me. So going forward, like, I don't think I'll be collaborating digitally. But there have also been instances where I've like kind of composed music for a friend's dance film, and that worked totally smoothly. Like, I guess also because, you know, I'm composing off something that was made for the screen, and that collaboration is not so, it doesn't need such a direct, sensitive collaboration. Yeah.
I was just going to add about the idea that Dena brought up about challenging our privilege and being able to challenge that. I think like you have to go through this process of continuously checking yourself and making sure that you're not taking too much authority over like the creation of something. I mean, I think a lot about like my work. It's always like putting myself in front of the camera and becoming the subject. And in that process, like going through this process of kind of questioning my own authority over like my own feelings, my own body, and like leaning more so into this vulnerable state allows this kind of connection with others, and that can become like a collaborative process. But also thinking about in this idea of like challenging privilege, your own privilege, and how you kind of fit into like certain systems and how you can reciprocate or perpetuate certain systems of oppression. Thinking about like challenging standards, challenging the way that you think of things. I've been having this constant conversation about reclamation versus just claiming, and thinking about this idea of not necessarily centering whiteness and thinking about reclaiming a story or a narrative from the starting point of whiteness, but thinking about just claiming what already is, you know, and thinking about my identity as a Black woman, claiming that and thinking about the ways in which Blackness has always been a starting point and will be continuously a point of reference forever. And so like constantly grappling with that, I feel like that's always been a part of my process. And I've been doing more work into letting more people into that process of questioning, because I think when people understand, like as an artist, it's not just about your end product, it's about kind of what you're doing in the process of creating that. They can see that like the same things that I'm struggling with and dealing with in this process of creating are similar to maybe what someone is dealing with on a regular everyday basis. So I think that's an important part of just, you know, being vulnerable and allowing people into kind of what you're doing and what you're thinking and what you're creating.
Yeah.
I think, and in terms of like, I think it was also funny that, you know, how there's like quarantine bubbles now. And I think like, I was reading about this, and it kind of, I thought it was funny because there's like a parallel between like, you know, what Stefania was saying, like getting a group of artists, going to an upstate house and like making work. That seems like a strange parallel to like, oh, let's all quarantine ourselves and, you know, only interact with these people. And I think Brian Brooks, his dance company is currently doing that, or like they have just done that, I think at Jacob's Pillow or something like that, where their whole company has been, you know, both, it's almost like a forced like arts residency where you can only interact with your fellow artists, not because it's an arts residency, but because you can bring the illness in to the rest of the company, which I think there's just something funny there. And also speaking to the point about like, you know, accessibility, I think there was a push kind of a few months ago of like the critics at New York Times being kind of all the same, you know, the same kind of profile, the same kind of people. And I used to think that like these people just like because I personally don't read the New York Times to tell me what what show to go see. So I kind of thought, oh, I mean, I don't really care. But then I started to hear from directors and friends that were like, I'm so concerned that my show is gonna be like misunderstood, or like they're not gonna get it. And I'm like, and these director friends are like, and this will actually affect my career in a big way. And I never realized that. And yeah, and I think they still, from what I heard last, I don't think anything has changed on that front. So yeah.
Yeah, so this is truly, I think, in a way, taking the temperature before we come to an end. Maybe all of you say, I know this is a project in development and it's not even done, but what else do you have cooking on your stove? I'm sure our audiences, will be interested. Maybe mention the website where they can find. But what are your projects? And then also, I would like to hear what inspires you at the moment. Like, do you listen to music? Is there a poet you read? Is there a novel? Or is there what, including you, David, what do you say? Well, this give me a moment of enlightenment or something. So both. So what are you working on? What's inspiring you? Or other artists? Yeah. Maybe you'll start, Stefania. And what do you think?
It's been long weeks of editing videos. So at the moment I was like, I don't know what is inspiring me. I'm on the computer 24 hours. But yeah, I think the projects I'm working on at the moment inspire me. I'm doing video design for an experimental Uncle Vanya at Fordham and going on to a project end of December. Doing some video design as well. So I'm on the computer too many hours editing, just like the silence of going to my bed and just being like, okay, now shut down. It doesn't, but I think my bed inspires me.
Good, yeah. It's a Corona statement, yeah.
Another project that I've been working on, it's an old idea that I've had that I never thought, that I thought I'd work on 3 years later or something, because it's so expensive to do. But then I thought during this time it's kind of relevant. It's a theater show with no actors. It's like lights moving across furniture moving across the stage, and music driving the whole thing. It's about an artist trapped in her apartment during the Spanish flu, and having no access to clients. She paints a self-portrait for the first time. I would never have worked on this now because it's so expensive, because it's all like, set pieces and puppetry and stuff like that. But I also wanted it to have only one audience member in like a 200-seat theater to highlight that element of loneliness and just, the work of art, which is the title. But so it seemed like it might be relevant now. So I am working on it now. In terms of what inspires me now, I've been listening to a lot of music because I've been composing music for this prelude piece. I think one song that I've been thinking about a lot in particular is Benjamin Clementine's Phantom of Aleppoville. I love his songs. It's a great blend of genre. I love him as an artist. I think he's so good and very interesting. And I guess similar to Stefania, I think I've also just been inspired in moments where I forced myself to sit there and not be doing something, because I think everyone is kind of like in a state of elevated stress these days. And so it's easy to just be like, just engage me in something, anything, I don't want to have to think about anything. But when I actually force myself to be like, okay, just like stop and do nothing, that has been when kind of, more ideas of value come to mind for me. Yeah.
David.
I'll go last because I want to close. I would need to say some things about the festival overall.
You can do that afterwards. Don't.
Oh, well, one of the things I'm inspired by a couple of things. I'll throw some couple. I mean, in the last 6 months, I've really been thinking about General Baker, who was this kind of formative figure in the what's often called the Black radical tradition. He was an organizer based in Detroit, and he worked in a Dodge car plant, and he led a series of wildcat strikes, which are, you don't have the permission of the union, you just leave. You can think of the NBA strike as a kind of version of a wildcat strike. And he saw, I mean, I'm totally stealing this from Fred Moten and Stefano Harney, these two very great critics and thinkers about various forms of systemic injustice. And, General Baker saw no contradiction in working for Dodge and trying to bring down Dodge. And part of it was because he liked being around workers. And for me, I've felt a lot of contradiction, obviously, of course, informed by my own position. I sit at almost every vector of privilege, and I need to take responsibility for that. But I've grown comfortable sitting in the contradiction that I want to bring down or completely rebuild the theater industry, while at the same time working and benefiting from that industry. And part of it because I want to be with artists and arts workers, including everyone on this call. So General Baker's example, he passed away several years ago, but he has loomed large in my imaginary by way of Moten and Harney. So that's been really inspiring to me over the last 6 or 7 months.
Yeah, thank you. Dena.
Okay, in terms of projects, I'm working on a docu-theater / documentary comic book thing that centers around a particular high school in Brooklyn, and kind of just the roles in which race and class played into this particular school. I can't necessarily say the name at the moment. In terms of, I guess, ongoing, and I don't know if I'm obnoxious for doing this to slowly bring up my book, but you could buy it at SPD. Don't buy it at Amazon. In terms of what I'm inspired by, I've been listening to a lot of music, but specifically I've been listening to 2000s pop music and R&B music, and I feel like lately there's been an interest in how great of a decade that was, the early 2000s, but I feel like no one really talks about how unique it was in terms of Millennium Pink and baggy pants and just the style and the aesthetic of it, and clear, transparent technology. So I've just been really excited because when I was younger, I really wanted to dress like that, but also I just feel like it puts me in a really great time. And it also I also feel like people don't talk enough about how the early 2000s was a decade of remixing in the best way. So I feel like it's inspired my art in ways of trying to figure out ways of repurposing different things and repurposing different narratives and things like that, but also fashion, Yeah.
So maybe it's time for you to write a play or a screenplay, like My Wonderful Laundrette, to capture what you say of the 2000, of the historical decade that's already so far behind us. It's stunning. So really, thank you all. And it's a significant, important discussion, also about the political. And on one hand, yes, all art is political, but some artists do political art, so if we say everything is, sometimes we take also something away from them who dedicatedly and very clearly say this is political. So but both is true, I think every uttering and statement, of course, by definition is. And I have to say, I'm stunned, by all of you and the engagement, Yeujia, who says, well, I didn't know about the emojis. I found out, but it's actually, I could do a Hollywood film, that you find that out, that Stefania has an actor in Argentina go down the step in your video, and the one from whatever, Brazil comes up and they look in the same space, but they are together. So something is happening. And Dena, who, created that chamber piece, in a way it is, in a colonial, heavy bed, where she talks about such the most private, intimate moments, but they are so political, so connected to history, but as well as to who we are, and Leandra's work. So and how to reflect on that and to engage with community. So I think it's a real kaleidoscope, and we really have to listen closely what everybody said here. And because there is something in there that might save us, that will help us to understand the world and also to engage in whatever they think about. It's also, we should ask us those questions. What have we done? How do we produce work? How are we with our neighbors? How do we listen to stories so we understand what perhaps we might convey in messages and neighborhoods we move in, and all of it. So really, thank you. This was a very significant talk. It was an honor to have you all with us, and I hope that festival also gave you a moment in time to create something, show it, and then you go on to the next one, that the process is of significance. Because as some say, the goal lies in the way. So sometimes what you want to do is in between what you want to achieve. It's the opposite. So David, tell us what's happening at Prelude today, and everything, and what do you think of the festival?
I want to give one thing. Leandra, did you get a chance to talk about your inspiration? I can't remember if we touched you or if I blanked out thinking about what I was going to say.
No, I didn't get a chance to.
Oh, sorry. Yeah,
we're running long, but go ahead. I want to hear it.
It's totally fine. I want to also plug for Dena. You should follow By Sean Brown, who's totally into the 2000s movement, and it's incredible. But yeah, right now I'm just thinking about the abstraction of language. So been rereading Audre Lorde, also thinking about a book by Robin Cost Lewis, Voyage of the Sable Venus, that I always think about in regards to poetry, language, the abstraction, and how you can kind of bring words together to create this movement. And then in regards to music, which has always been a huge influence for me, I've been listening to Sun Ra on repeat. Alice Coltrane and Pharoah Sanders are just a few that just constantly bring me back to, again, this movement of rhythm, language, and sometimes even the absence of language, and how beautiful that can be. And I'm gonna just do my piece is premiering tonight on Prelude's website at 8 p.m., Passing Time with Grace. So if anyone's able to check that out, please do. And I'm so thankful for it as well.
Thank you.
Excellent. And thank you all. We have, as Leandra kind of intimated, we have a marathon lineup today. So Penny Thoughts, which is a video kind of reflection on a project that's ongoing that you can check out on Instagram, is happening at 5, and then it will be available. Animal Empire by our very own Yeujia and her collaborator Justin Aaron Hall will be at 5:30, and then we have a performance at 6:30 called Body 100, collaboration between Garrett Allen and Nazareth Hassan, and then Leandra's piece at 8, Passing Time with Grace, which I can't wait, and then at 9 o'clock, Mayan Teo is concluding her 2-week-long project called Hold, in which she has been inviting, she's holding space for meditation. It's about 25 minutes. And at the end, she's invited a series of speakers whom she calls queer holies to give a prayer to close the event. So I'm not sure who is speaking tonight. Oh, it's Naya Witherspoon. So please check that out. And then the festival, some of it will be available forever. Some of it will have to come down. But the website is there, preludenyc2020.com, and you can see the work of all these wonderful artists. So thank you all. Thank you, Frank. It's been great to kind of co-host the last week with you. I'm not sure how much I brought to the equation, but it's just been great to bear witness to this enterprise.
And thank you, and Miranda, for all the work you did for the Prelude Festival. It's really truly an experiment. It's very open, like these talks. And I think this is remarkable, the group of people, artists you brought together, the conversations you all generated, the idea of the site and the website to take it serious, this kind of retro Macintosh, early Mac look, what you created for the website, and the quietness also of the pieces, lots of them, they were not screaming and attention and Broadway and entertainment, they were often like radio plays. They were small pieces or not long, so you can really, I felt, get a sense of the atmosphere of the moment we are in, which also is something of significance to capture that. And there's a variety of voices that also make really clear statements. So we did great, and I'm really proud of you as curators having put that together. So this is an important thing for us at the Segal. This festival, it's the biggest event of the year and the most significant one. So, and we give it to people really as a full, free white page to create something, or carte blanche. So it's as something. And is there a celebration at the end? And will there be?
Yes, there is a party, although I don't think it's not open to the public. Our team has put it together, and I'll quickly say thank you to our entire team. As I've said on these other talks, I'm merely an emanation of a larger ensemble. You know, I'm standing in for a group of people making it happen all the time. Not only my co-curator, Miranda Heyman, but the producers, Samuel Moriali, Sammy Pine, Lucy Powis, our graphic designer, Lena Mitchell, and our website developer, Lorena Ramirez Lopez, who made magic on WordPress happen, as long as our collaborators at the Segal Center, not only Frank, but Andy Lerner as well. So, and our stage manager, Harry, who is amazing at calling cues on Zoom. He should really publish something about using the chat feature. But so thanks to all those people as well.
Incredible. A 2-week festival today already is the last day. It's coming to an end, and that might be a good thing with this time of prelude and the current political regime. All things come to an end, if they're good things or bad things. So, and I hope this is a good thing that comes to an end, but I hope also that what's bad and insufferable will come to an end. So thank you all. Thanks for Howlround for hosting us, Thea, BJ, and everybody, Travis. So thank you, and stay safe and stay tuned. Next week we have with us Karen Malpete and George Batenia, 2 actors or writers who have all their work focused on the political playwrights. On the day after the election, we'll have Simon Dove from ArtsLink, and the idea of radical hosting, something they feel strongly about. What does that mean? Maybe this is a way to change our neighborhoods. It's also something of a significance for the performance world. How do we engage with the people? And then we have the great Susan Feldman, who runs St. Anne's Warehouse, and let's hear what's on her mind. How is she coping with the situation? What are the plans? What are the realities of running such a place? So thank you. Stay safe, stay tuned, and I can't wait for today of the prelude. Thank you.